especially but it's funny, right? On the one hand, I completely agree. But on the other hand, this is coming
I'm not.
time when I'm not people of color and so there's sometimes there where you wonder whether the right anger of the right and left are coming together to dismantle something that might have a bit of promise compared to 20 years ago.
Hello.
I mean, maybe we should put our chairs down. Indeed.
Huh?
Indeed.
Indeed. And embrace the true spirit of
And
conversation.
I'm also fine with just making it a conversation.
Yeah, like
everyone
can just talk.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if, because now I know people are coming online. We should just open this instead so people can also talk.
Totally.
Che, what do you think? After all that effort to set up the yeah, go for it.
So,
Nobody's. Nobody's.
Hi.
Hi.
It's us.
Hi. Wow. So nice to see you.
Okay, it's happening on here in a way I don't understand. What is happening?
Here.
Hi. Hi. How are you? I'm good. And you? The best and honest. Good to meet you. Oh, we're nice.
Oh no, so lovely. You're so welcome.
What's this is only this is the light. Oh, you don't know.
Yes, this is my favorite.
So only this floor is the light.
yeah, and I think this is like where I'm temporary, like library. Yeah.
They're building another.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, it's amazing to have to see folks. Yeah, see people.
Yeah, I brought friends. I always come with a group.
Yes, please.
Yes.
One thing you gotta do.
Hi.
With some people.
We're having a lecture.
Yeah.
Yeah, please come.
Yeah. It's just gonna be us.
Just like this. Oh, Anthony! Holy shit.
Okay. Here's my thought.
It's a long time.
I have a thought. What if we have this whole vision? But since it's us and we all know each other, Claudia has a good team. What if I sent two people in the street?
Correct. That's fair. It's the chicken and egg, or maybe it's not chicken and egg. That once the decline comes.
Because I realized it.
You've already sent to other people as well. Okay, I got you.
It's
Okay.
okay.
Yeah, it's totally okay.
And also, like,
Look at that.
the laptop is not connected to the speaker.
Okay, then let's not complicate it.
Yeah, maybe I can find a way to.
Just so they can also take part in the combo.
Thank you all for being online. I'm not sure who is there. just relax.
Yeah, it's just literally. Your friends from outside. The teachers at outside.
Probably digital. Yeah. I'm not sure humble or not. It's like admire having study. Yes, it's we'll see. Thank you all for coming. We'll be starting the talk soon. Yeah, let's just start.
Do you want to do a table situation? Do you want to do...
Yeah, this is fine, and you guys can sit on here. And,
Who's there?
I'm not sure.
Oh, Pamela. Hi, Pamela.
So if you're here, do you mind like saying something
Hi, Shalom.
so we know you're here?
I love it. Shauna's
Yes,
here.
Please. So I'm making some jasmine tea.
This is us, fam. It's gonna be a sweet conversation. Presente.
This is already video.
Here we go.
Yes.
I made and would you like a t-shirt with or without alcohol? One of us?
I don't think that's yes.
May I take some of the water just to put the few drops of tincture?
Oh yeah, sure. You don't want the tea?
I want the t-shirt. Okay. Do you want the t-shirt? Okay, this is yours. Do you have a recommendation for the number of drops?
Like, just like several, yeah.
Okay.
It depends. Like,
Anthony.
hello.
Ooh.
It's too hot.
It's delicious.
Great.
It's kind of green tea. Is it green tea?
It's jasmine. Yes.
No, I just came up.
Oh, get in here, friends.
Is it okay for you?
Yeah.
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 How many people in the room?
We have 5 people.
Hi, people.
It's cute. Ding Ding. This is
Shauna's
so my
here,
friend.
Shauna's
My
here,
friend's here.
Pamela's here. Aw,
Hello, Ding Ding.
I like this.
No.
Yes, no.
So I'm really glad that you guys are already having like tea and tinctures.
Is that going to fall off?
I think it's okay.
Is it okay?
Yeah. Yeah. I hope you all will like feel some presence of the plant while we are talking about plant today. So my name is Che.
Okay.
I-
Still okay?
Yeah, please do whatever you want. It's like intimate and cute. So I'm the organizer of this event and also the moderator for today's talk. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you Chinatown branch of the Public Library for supporting this event. So they're there. Yes, and I want to thank you guys for coming here to share about your work. And I'm very excited to hear about the presentation. Yeah, they're looking for some like conversations. And all of you guys are like, of course, welcome to join the conversation. And also the folks online, you're also very welcome to join the conversation through the chat, and I will try to moderate the thread of like chatting. And I want to like first spend a few minutes introduce you to this event and introduce you to DP and Banu. And I'm not the best public speaker, so I prepare some notes. Welcome. Before that, I want to do a land acknowledgement, and I'm not doing it as a performative gesture, but a way of setting the tone for our talk today, as we will be discussing topics around displacement, dispossession, and erasure. And these issues are not only historical, but are deeply entangled with our state of being right now. Therefore, it's crucial to acknowledge that the land we are on is a stolen land, and it is the ancestral territory of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag nations. And as a newcomer to this land, I want to offer my gratitude to the indigenous people for their past, present, and future partaking. And I want to offer my appreciation to the land, the water, the non-human entity for sustaining us. Today's event is titled Rustling Room, Who is the Invader? It's a lecture and discussion to try to attune ourselves with the rustling frequency that plants are making. And this is also part of the event, a series of events, lecture, exhibition, workshops under the title Interstitial Life, 间隙生命. And all this event will be happening in and around Chinatown for a week or so, from October 14th to the 23rd. Feel free to check out the schedule here for other events. And Interstitial Lives is a community-oriented project that attempts to cultivate cross-species kinship between residents in Boston Chinatown neighborhood, passers-by, and our rural plant neighbors. The plant, we call them weed, that grows in interstitial spaces between building, highway, and fences. Like the space we are in right now, as you can probably see, like we are surrounded by like the high-rise and like really busy streets. And the Chinatown itself is cut through by multiple highways. And the word rural plant that I'm using is borrowed from theorist Bettina Stelter's book, Rural City. And in the book, she described the way birding ecologists after the Second World War used rural to refer ecologies that spontaneously inhabit disturbed environments. And for them, the rural is an analytical framework for rethinking and tracing the heterogeneity of urban life in ruins of European capitalism and nationalism. And for me, approaching ruins in the context of Chinatown here, which is also formed and effect by racialized exclusion, capitalist urbanization, and profound environmental harm. And I suggest that rural can provide a lens to explore these issues. And something I want to say is like, among Boston neighborhoods, Chinatown experiences the hottest temperature during the day and night in summer, which is due to the extreme lack of green space and also all these impervious infrastructure services. And these issues goes hand in hand. And so for me, it's important to think about what's the plans that are already in, like what are the plans that we already have in Chinatown. Therefore, for this project, we're going to talk about Ailanthus altissima, commonly known as Tree of Heaven. And similar to like other weed plants, these trees usually grows in environmentally disturbed area and these plants are also called invasive species. And Tree of Heaven is originally from East Asia and imported to US as a horticultural plant for private garden in the 19th century. And I was first aware of this plant when I was looking at some archival pictures of protests happening in Chinatown because of gentrification and land occupation. And these trees appear in those photographs almost like a quiet witness to the movement that's been happening in Chinatown. And actually, I have a picture of one of the protests for workers' rights, and you can see that Tree of Heaven is like, yeah, sitting behind it, and yeah, and therefore I think for this project, I want to propose that we see the Tree of Heaven as living monuments. They witness, commemorate, and reactivate moments of self-organized resistance, and they also embody multiple xenophone, culture, familial, and personal memory that challenge neoliberal urbanization. And this is also through researching Tree of Heaven and invasive species I encountered writing of both of you. And Banu, your book, Ghost Story of Darwin, The Science of Variation and Politics of Diversity, helped me think about the way gender, race, class, sexuality, and nation are interconnected with like how we see science and how science studies nature. And DP, your work helped me think about how invasive species like Tree of Heaven materially and symbolically act as an unruly character that could challenge heteronormative capital ways of living and organizing space. And yeah, and with that, I want to welcome our first speaker, Banu Subramaniam. Good. I'm not gonna do the bio because I think
fine.
Yeah, everybody knows, Banu and DP. So yeah, Banu, please.
I'm wondering if you should dispense with the talks.
I think we
Do
could
one more.
really live into conversation.
Yes,
I
yes.
love that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, so no.
Is that okay
Yeah,
with
please do
I'll
whatever
show
you
some
want.
pictures. I will.
Cool.
you? So it's really interesting how you frame. Do we need this?
Maybe I don't know.
Because it's just them, right? The mic
Yeah,
there is there.
the mic is here. Okay.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting of how you frame this around the Tree of Heaven witnessing, of having lived through so much, and and that's I have to think about it from that point of view, which is not what my. So I've been thinking more. I came to interstitial lives because I feel that when I started working on invasive species as a biologist, I felt kinship with them just because of noticing the ways in which they were categorized in exactly the same ways as immigrants are, right? So ultimately, one can be a naturalized citizen, but never a native-born citizen. Plants similarly can be naturalized species, but can never be native, right? So there is something about that essential characteristic of the native that holds on. So it's that same process of getting green cards and become citizens that plants do as well. And I think the more, and as I started reading more about the history, so this is the thing, you're trained as a biologist, you're taught no history, right? So you have to go, learn yourself. And now realizing that how much of colonialism is really ecological imperialism, right? That part of what colonialism is they took plants willy-nilly across the world. They built plantations where they want. They picked particular species they saw as economically important. And then people and plants were caught up in, a kind of extractive capitalist cycle that lives on to today. And so many of the species that are invasive today, so Tree of Heaven is one. There's another, kudzu, which was first exhibited in the World's Fair, and then the USDA paid farmers to plant them to prevent soil erosion.
Mm.
Right? And then they take off. And now we erase that history and we just see it as this evil plant. But there are, in other parts of the world, people use kudzu flower, they use the bark of the tree for fiber, right? Or, I was thinking also of the Asian carp, which is eaten in parts of the world, which is prized. So it's overfished in China. But here, they brought it as worker fish to clean up sewage plants, and then it escapes. And now it's this huge menace. And people don't know what to do with it. And so now they're packing it up and shipping it to China, right? So all of this is about those interstitial lives and that part of our inability to live with our environments, to incorporate neighbors and new neighbors that come, but holding on to some vision of an idyllic life that existed and then wanting to eradicate all these new neighbors and preserve some way of life that existed before. So maybe
Yeah. Yes. It's so good to meet you, Banu.
Same
And it's so
here.
good to be here. And it's so good to be here with you all. And nice to meet you too. And nice to see and know that there are beloved teachers and friends tuning in on the stream. Yeah, I was going to start there as well as this invitation, the way this invitation landed. So I'm not a biologist by any stretch of the imagination, not even really aligned to discipline in a traditional academic sense. But one of my beloved friends said, remember that you are also an academic and you have studied this. Yes. So the Tree of Heaven, in a way, like this photograph that Che showed, it kind of insisted itself in another set of questions that I was sitting with about 15 years ago as an undergraduate student who had just moved to New York. I started to pay a certain kind of attention to spaces, and this was my budding queerness, right? So I came to it by way of my own voluntary leaving of a place that was a place of abandonment. My sort of three keywords for tonight are abandonment. I'm going to narrow it to two, and intimacy. So, I grew up in that kind of situation where I felt I had to leave home, Cleveland, a post-industrial city, really marked by abandonment, that which had become useless, in very material terms, and go somewhere else to be queer. But those questions, of course, followed me. And I started to notice and pay attention to these kinds of edgy spaces. So first the Hudson River Park, which, I started to learn the history of the queer piers and the way that the piers that were adjacent to Christopher Street and other areas of Lower Manhattan that were, largely queer or made queer, let's say, over time. How those spaces became these kinds of edgy places for, making culture, for public sex, for all these types of things. I got really interested in cruising. So what I started to notice is that Tree of Heaven, as this very insistent species, was one of the first in many of the spaces that I was also gravitating towards at that time intellectually. I wasn't actually cruising. I was thinking about cruising, which was symptomatic of the way that I was living at that time. And at some point, I started to gravitate toward this idea of queer ecology. So what happens when we start layering the experiences of sexuality, nature, urban space, all of these things together? And at first, I will say I probably instrumentalized the tree a little bit, because it became a kind of a figure, a way to talk about it. So as this work came back to me through the invitation that you offered me with 10 years or 12 years or 15 years of distance, I was able to look at it in a less instrumental way and think about and
what do
feel
you mean by
into.
instrumental?
I mean, I think I used the tree to talk about something.
I see.
Right? Initially.
Yeah.
And then I started to listen more carefully to what the tree was saying, as such, as like what it was trying to teach me about the kinds of spaces that I was interested in, the work that it was doing to remake these spaces, the cover that it was also providing for people as they were up to whatever they were up to behind the bushes, making art, having sex, living, sleeping, doing drugs, whatever they were doing. What's going on behind the bushes? And then at some point, that drifted to, well, who are these bushes? Who is providing cover for this kind of activity? And Tree of Heaven was always the most prominent in all of these spaces. One, because it grows very fast, as you know. And so I just started to get very intimate and involved, and I want to say curious, but that word feels very evocative of an aspect of why Tree of Heaven was first brought to North America and Europe in the first place, as a sort of ornamental decoration that people wanted to serve a particular kind of aesthetic purpose, and then became very disinterested in, as the Victorians often did. They thought, oh, maybe we can do silk, maybe we can get it to make silk, and this would be cheaper, and maybe we can do this, and it would be cheaper. So in any case, I started to, in some way, think that I was following the tree, and then over years realizing that the tree was following me because it's everywhere. So those are some of the things. But I was really, I guess what I landed on in particular, through Judith, also through Yves, also through Claudia, is the way that the tree has persistently configured different kinds of intimacies in the way that I think about and feel how I move through urban space. I want to start there. I want to sort of offer it, I appreciate what you're saying, Che, about the idea of the monument. And then I'm also very sensitive to the fact that when you invited us into the series through this attunement, I asked you a question, which was, what was the first point of contact for your creative engagement with the tree? And I think you said it was sound, right?
Yeah, sound, and also like photographs like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I was saying that I was looking at protests.
Yeah.
That happened about like how the residents in Chinatowns are thinking or like organizing around getting rid of big institutions like Tufts University and the medical center here to occupy space, and they go up onto the street, and I don't know, I feel like there's something like organic happening there, and in some way that like is mirroring how the plant is growing. It's also like organically and occupying spaces, or like occupying back the spaces that they used to grow and then being cut down and then regrow. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like, and also I like Banu, you're talking about immigration, because like when we are immigrating, we are like filing all these documents, and in a way that we are being put into categories, right? We are aliens, or we are naturalized citizens, and we are desired or undesired. And I think like DP, you're also saying like the neighborhood of Chelsea, and it's like turning from like an undesired space, like called by them, to a desired culture, like where culture is happening, that kind of space. So I feel like there's this paradigm between like desire and undesired. It's interesting, and I'm curious, like, how do you guys think about it? What is this desire? I mean, what are people thinking about? Like, for me, like this desires is linked with like property relationship, right? I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm just like
I think it's about being good submissive workers.
submissive workers.
So those species that came and did what they were supposed to and didn't do anything else. So like most of the vegetables and crops we use are all foreign, but we don't think of them as bad. It's those plants that don't know their place and they take off.
Yeah,
and similarly with people. If you come and you're a good worker, you go home and at night and don't ask for higher wages, it's okay. It's when you start fighting for rights or doing something that you were not supposed to. That's when you become undesirable. Exactly.
Interesting. What about you? How do you think about it?
So you're saying, what is it about desire?
Yeah, I mean, and also you're talking about cruising, right?
Yeah.
And it's like all about desire.
I mean, listen, I came by Tree of Heaven in a very queer way, right? But it was also in a way that was about thinking about this story. Okay, so the story of the High Line. Okay, do you all know what the High Line is? Have you heard of the High Line? Okay, the High Line is this abandoned piece of infrastructure, right? It was initially constructed, to serve the industrial production that was happening in Lower Manhattan, right? And it was, what I got interested in for the theme of the thing of interstitial is what happens to these epic constructions that then have 10 or 20 or 30 years after they've outlived their utility, the seemingly inert things. Because I'm with you on the question of who stays in their place, who doesn't, who is obedient, who can be, like all of these kinds of things. But if I retrace my steps to how do I come to Tree of Heaven and the question of desire, it's the way that the tree itself does all of this work to actively recreate a landscape within the shell of something that has been disabused, that has been wasted, literally, that has been used to the end of its liveliness before, for example, workers, started to organize themselves in ways to demand better conditions for their living. If we think about why Lower Manhattan is deindustrialized, and so everything is containerized and moved out to ports where it can be more easily controlled, regulated, and monitored, and all these things. Of course, the infrastructure doesn't just disappear. It's suspended in this sort of in-between place. And, the particular story of the High Line is really interesting because of the ways that it became a very convenient, seemingly blank kind of landscape, which obviously echoes the whole narrative of colonization in a specifically urban context, right? Where there's nothing happening there. Nobody uses it. Even though the two white gay men who started to champion the redevelopment of the thing in the first place initially began their appreciation of the space. They never said in their book whether or not they actually fucked there, interestingly. But they did say that they met at a community meeting where they kind of low-key cruised each other, right? Like there is this moment of intimacy that's like, oh, who's that guy and what's he thinking about? So the whole seed for their project, if you want, comes from this moment of sort of unspoken desire between the two of them, who for various reasons, because of who they were, the wealth they had, their access to very powerful people within urban planning, were able to configure a whole aesthetic situation which captured the sort of desirable energy of this green space, repackaged it with no responsibility to the actual living beings, human or otherwise, who were inhabiting the space, and rewrote it as this highly desirable landscape, right? So in some ways, we have like almost this sort of unspoken gay drama played out over a piece of infrastructure that then has billions and billions of dollars of consequences and waves of displacements, right? So I read it like at that scale, from the very particular moment of a glance in a meeting that led two people to have a conversation that enabled them to then continue a conversation, which brought in world-class photographers and urban real estate development consulting firms and Diane von Furstenberg and Martha Stewart and all of these fundraisers, right? And all of this in many ways is built on the effort, the very present, enduring, slow effort of plants to actually recreate the space. I don't want to say recolonize the space because people talk about these plants as colonizers, and I feel very ambivalent about the application of that description, right? They're caught up in a drama of colonization, right? Which is expressing its desire for something exotic or something new or something, to incorporate in this way. And it's not, of course, only the plants, it's also the sort of secret whispers of what happens behind the plants or what everybody knows and nobody tells about the real way that things work. So I don't know if that speaks to the question, but it's some gay shit. Anyway, that's all I can say in the best and the worst ways. Anyway, that's not exactly the most tidy summary of what I said. And it's a part of it.
Well done.
It's part of it.
Yeah.
That to me was what became particularly fascinating, right? That they felt or expressed no ethical obligation to the thing that actually coordinated the desires that then played out at this massive and very destructive scale for a lot of people in the vicinity of the project that they championed.
Do we want to open it up?
Sure. I mean, if you guys have any questions, feel free to join us.
Or to join us in conversation.
Please, yeah, because it's like really small and intimate.
And also, y'all, hi in there.
And similarly,
Yeah, please. And Banu, I'm curious, like, how do you come across like invasive species like tree of heaven or katsu?
How do I come across?
Or like, how do you start it, or why do you start to be interested in them?
Just, it's just because, to me, it's because I think the parallels with human immigration. And if you talk to people who work on invasion biology,
it's
the visceral hatred they have towards plants.
It is really hatred.
It really is. It's so it takes, you get taken aback. And if you go to one of these, so there's this whole field called restoration ecology, and the idea really is to restore it to something. The amount of chemicals, mechanical, equipment to destroy what's there, it's very palpable. And so to me, I started getting interested in, on the one hand, we said, green is beautiful and we should appreciate what is green. But it turns out that most people can't identify species. So then it's like all those, how those danger signs are packaged. How to, this beautiful beetle is really evil. How you learn, how we are taught that this is a bad species of plant, this is a bad species of beetle. But these are all completely abstract, right? We're told no histories of how they came here, how they came to be, how we, so with Karen Cardoso, who's a colleague, we call it invited invasions. Most of these, we invited the species here, we brought them here, we cultivated them. And so we just lose that history in then finally just making this abstract concept of these evil species, which is literally what people say.
Yeah, I like that your word, like using words like evil and good, or just think like a lot of the way that we think about science or think about nature relies on metaphors, or like or it's like heavily based on our own agenda, political agenda, about how we think about foreign, like human. I don't know, like it's. I want to say, like, I'm curious, like, how do you think about it outside of thinking about this, like language as problematic? But do you think if these kind of language can be used as an opportunity for us to rethink the whole like these whole systems of thinking
Absolutely.
about this?
I think we never escape language.
Yeah.
We always have to use it. But I think we can use it to tell different histories. We can use it to reframe questions and reframe species and reframe relationships.
So how do you mean by?
So rather than calling this an evil species, of telling the history of why kudzu is here, of what kind of human agency and the hubris of human agency, right? So most of species that were here was because people brought them. They did not think about the consequences of what will happen. It's no different than what we're doing today. That with it's not the, I'm spacing out, what did they say, that do no harm, what is that expression of, not ahimsa, of that, spacing. So you just don't do something, right? You think about the consequences of what may happen there, but I think we don't do enough of that. So even today we are doing things of introducing species because it will do that, or introducing this gene into the mosquito so it will stop reproducing. So every technological problem, the fix is another technology. We never go back to thinking of the philosophy by which we live life and live with other organisms. It's one technology after the other. And it gets us deeper and deeper into problems.
That's funny. Like, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about your question about language, and this is probably not the question that you asked, but there's a way in which the separation that people allow themselves from plant life in particular means that they tell on themselves, because how they feel about those plants is also in some unspoken way how they feel about the histories that are unspoken that those plants carry with them, right? It's just that they can name their hate, or they do name their hate in that instance, right? It was a conversation that Yeh and I were having, which is part of the reason when I talk about how the plant configures intimacy. It has to do with slowing down enough to listen to what the plant is trying to say. There's a reason that this plant came back around. There's a reason that, a teacher that I sit with, who I respect very deeply, is here, right? Like, as we work through, anyway, this is a whole other set of work, right? Like that relates very much to the work of decolonization, how that work itself has been appropriated, right? In the same way that I could say that these white gay men sort of, not the same way, but in a way that I'm still thinking through, like how they appropriate the ongoing labor through the disrespect that is enabled through the fantasy of human separation from everything else, right? Not human, but like those humans, to whom the white gay men were recently admitted. Do you know what I'm saying? As fully human. So there's a way in which people tell themselves with plants. And I don't know, there's something about this invitation that I'm still sort of dwelling on about, why it comes back around. Something that has, of course, always been there. It's just that my attention to it has wandered over time, and yet here it comes again, right? It's literally everywhere. It's literally insisting itself everywhere, right? So what does this insistence in my own intimate experience, not because it's all about me, actually remind me to pay attention to as my work, such as it is, seems to drift into other seemingly unrelated areas? It configures those kinds of relationships, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay. That part. Because anyway, Eve, can I
Some of
reference
it can
our
only
conversation?
happen when you decenter yourself to think of
Absolutely,
the world.
100%, which is what the tree also invites, right?
Yeah.
Like in some way, I didn't really choose to work on it, right? I chose to pay attention to the fact that it was always there in the places that I thought were interesting to me. So then I had to ask, well, what work is it doing in that space, right? Anyway, it's another anecdote, but Eve and I were having a conversation, in a very casual kind of everyday way. And I was like, I'm going to Boston, I got this beautiful invitation from an artist who's put together this whole ensemble situation around a tree that 15 years ago I wrote about. And we started having this conversation, centered around the question of invasion. And Eve, you can probably say from your side what that conversation was like. But you were saying, it's funny, I've been sitting with this ethics of, an invasive species too in Pittsburgh, and how the message is just so unproblematically repeated over and over and over that the only way that we can be in relation to this experience, which even if we don't speak of it, is known on some very deep level, that like this is happening because of the I don't want to say imbalance, it's not the right word, but it is happening not because of us, it's that thing of centering, not centering, like in relation to our inattention to the reality, our irresponsibility for the realities that continue to be generated. And it's not evenly distributed. But you said the message was very clear: kill, kill, kill. That was the only available option for how to configure yourself in relationship to this species. And I said, well, what is it? And you said, it's a lanternfly. You're like, it eats the tree of heaven. And I stopped in my tracks. And I said, so you're coming to Boston, right? Right? Like, just, it's that kind of trust too, right? Like, what happens when you actually allow that which insists, beyond the divide of like what is comfortable to think about as a separate species, to be that which also configures the intimacy and where attention and effort and labor goes. And that's not very easy, because there's what I want, but maybe it's not about what I want. Anyway, that's my little diatribe about it, Yeah.
Do anyone of you have some questions?
What's your name? Ahmed. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And I was thinking of how you right now deal with this question of possession and dispossession. It's not things that are underhand. And it's real that engagement that we're looking at different conversations there. And the message is the same, right? Kill, kill, kill. And that's what we're looking at. Now on a global scale. My question is that, once plants or species like these find them in these spaces, how are we engaging with them outside of this framework of the need to get rid of them? Right? What is, so language is one mode of communication. Right? Experience perhaps is another one, more restricted, to let that existence of experience with that. And thinking of other modes of engagement that we can have. We're now in Wisconsin found space amongst other things that we did. How do we engage with them? How do we engage their existence?
So what brings you here? And what is your interest in invasive species?
Okay, that's a great question. I'm reading a book. I dropped a friend in class. I was just reading.
No accidents. It's no accidents.
That was right. So yeah, I come from Pakistan. And we're I'm a literature major and graduated last year. The conversation of the way we're looking at literature is looking about decolonization. It's questioning beyond this craft, and it's questioning like politics and systems collectively. Something that is investigation.
Yeah.
One thing that comes to mind is, again, this question of engagement. How are you engaging with the oppressor? How are you engaging with people who don't want to engage? And when these moral judgments are passed, this language is used. What is the other way to break down?
I'm stuck on the word engagement. Yeah. On the mode engagement. Because I'm very literal in some ways, and engagement first rings for me as a militaristic term. And so I'm curious about why engagement, right? Not to be that person who answers a question with another question, right? What is it about? Maybe is it because it feels like that relation is already like an engagement, and so like it's already in the mode of engagement?
Yeah, no, I
See what I'm saying?
I didn't really understand.
Okay.
That is like perhaps difference of context.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In terms of when you want something, it's
Mhm.
just you want to engage with which means
Mhm.
you want to say something with
Yeah.
so like not a confrontation, not a conversation.
What was that?
Relation.
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 How do you build that relationship or even intimacy from that?
There.
How do you
Listen. That's why, like for me, like first, teacher present, and many teachers present, and like co-travelers present who have insisted on listening, which is why I was like, of course, sound was one of the first modes, and that you found a way to, in a way that like that those nodes. So for folks who weren't there, Che developed some wild system to clip 2 nodes to any living thing, and then when you touch, it feeds into a synthesizer, and you have this sort of sonic. I won't even call it a representation because it's not. But you have this sort of sonic expression of what life is moving between those 2 things. And I think that was the thing. I'm so grateful. It took me 12 years to finally listen to what maybe the tree was trying to express. Like there was obviously some attraction there. There was like, oh, I want something from you, or I think you can do something for me. And that was the energy maybe that also brought someone to say, ooh, that's pretty. Let me bring this over here. This is just me being very simplistic with me, And then 12 years later it comes back. You know what I'm saying?
But what you're saying is also making me wonder about responsibility.
That part.
Right? That whether they, plants speak to us and we can hear them, and that's an important question. But even if they didn't do that, we have a responsibility
100%.
to things we brought here, rather than now they've outlived
Yes.
that now we kill them. So it's also that responsibility for the world around that we've created. And
Yeah.
how do we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was very much the question. Okay, so unless, because it kind of sounds like something woo to be like, listen, right?
No, I'm not saying.
Okay.
No, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that it's not everyone can listen.
That part.
Not everyone is able to listen.
There's a lot of noise.
So to me, I would also.
Okay.
The vocabulary, for example, of aesthetics.
Yeah.
Right. That it's not manicured lawns, and those poor trees.
Yeah.
That we should appreciate. It's also developing a different aesthetic of what so-called nature looks like that we need to cultivate.
Yeah.
Unruly spaces as beautiful as things doing whatever they want, as beautiful, and not as all the vocabularies of jungle and unkempt and unruly. Right? This is all about a language, about a nature that where humans have stopped interfering. It's always seen in a negative light. So it's like, how do we also reframe the aesthetics by which we look?
Yeah.
How do we rethink living with nature? Because often all these plants have had different relationships with humans in other parts.
Absolutely.
How do we develop new relations?
Yeah.
Which is what we do with people. We've learned,
Yes.
we've learned to do that with immigrants who come from different, not always,
Hopefully.
but let's say,
I mean,
in the best case, fair enough.
Yeah,
fair
in the
enough.
best case scenario.
But there are kind of those models. So how do we translate those to, across species?
I also think like listen is almost like a way of like reorienting like our way of seeing things, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's like focusing on the way our body interact with this plant. That's why I bring the tea and also the tinctures from Tree of Heaven, Spark, and is to have like some sort of the components of the plants in our body while we're talking about it,
That part.
right?
Yeah.
Because like I think as human we focus too much on visions, and we make distinction between, you know, aesthetically good-looking things or bad-looking things, and I don't know, like our body parts is always like forgotten. And I think like a lot of scholars like Don Haraway or like talks about like the way we see about things is like situated, right? And to also going back to your question about like how we like engage with conflicts and think, I don't know, like, because I think a lot of the time anxieties come to us when we are facing like conflicts. And similarly, I think the way people think about Tree of Heaven is that we are having a hard time to deal with our anxiety towards a environmental destruction, because, you know, this plant doesn't, I mean, the reason that these plants grow in urban spaces is that none of like other plants can grow, right?
Exactly. That part, yeah.
Yes, and people started to use like different kind of language to talk about them because they are having a hard time to like think about other issues.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
And we will have many more conversations, and you may convert me, but
Wait, what am I converting you to?
no, there's a way in which I think I resist some of the language because it becomes too human-centric.
Tell me more.
So we have to listen to the plants. We have to watch them like we watch other humans. We have to talk to them like we talk. So it's about almost making them human-like. And part of what I'm trying to figure out is how do we do multi-species conversations without making them human, right? That they don't talk, we don't listen, but we can still, you know, find other modes of relationships.
I'm with you.
That are not so that, but I'm
with you on that, and I definitely am not trying to convert you to the human-centered. And
I don't think it is human-centered. So this is all I'm saying is this is my resistance. You are right that, you know, everything we could, all the world may talk. Is talk the best word? Maybe it is the best word. So all I'm saying is I'm on a learning curve here.
Me too. I feel like I'm learning. Part of me doesn't want to say anything. Like ever. I feel, you know, especially in relation to, you know, I was going back and I shared earlier a poem that has to do with my own relationship to trees, but in the sense of lineage, right? And, you know, I mean, I wrote in the way that students write because it's what you think you have to do. And, you know, and it's not an apology for any of the writing or the effort to gesture toward it, but I find that all these years later, you know, Che, like you're already kind of doing it. Like it is literally in the tea, right? It is literally, you know, so maybe the grafting of this, the idea of the conversation on how we have to, like we're already in relationship with the plant.
Agreed.
We're already in relationship with the plant. The problem with that relationship is that if we stopped, like think about those abandoned cities, like Richard maybe wrote about this in Weeds, right? Where he says, you know, the decrease in human activity in highly urbanized areas, which continuously have to insist themselves in all of these ways of you know, according to the logic of capital and colonialism and all the things, that what would begin to make them a forest is a tree of heaven. That's what brings the forest back to what is now the city, right? So like it's like, stop, no, go away, like stop undoing what we're persistently trying to do, which is not really working, right? You know, in that sense. So I guess I mean it in that there's an impatience, I guess, that arises in me with myself on some level. because I'm already in relationship with it, right? And
Agreed.
you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And then it's like the difficulty or the effort to try to describe that relationship,
Yeah.
which re-insists on my separation from it, right? And like a subtle, more insidious, maybe closer in kind of way that it insists itself, or that I think, right? Like that is the moment where I actually feel like in ever more intimate scales, the gesture of separation from that, right? You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. And we are going to have more conversations. Right?
And I was in part speaking to is also
Yeah.
where the literature goes, right?
part,
Where
yeah.
we are increasingly making, I don't want to say making it an eye image, but we are developing a vocabulary of plants that hasn't existed before. And I am a little
Yeah. Like the plant.
resistant. The plants,
scholarly
fields,
stuff.
the
Yeah,
scholarly
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
about, animating plants in particular ways. And I may change my mind and
Yeah,
completely
yeah,
go
yeah.
on board, but I'm
I
still
know, I
at
hear you.
a slightly resistant
Well, no
stage.
wonder.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, and I include myself here, in some ways, like, we as academics, if we follow those scripts, like, we can be the worst in that sense. Do you know what I mean? I mean, to put it very bluntly. In that way of, like, it's kind of the same gesture of, like, what can this do for me, right?
Yeah.
What can this, I mean, it's very much the same gesture. Like, what can this do for my thinking? What can this do for, whereas, like, people have been in relation with this plant, as you said earlier, for thousands of years, right? It's just that it is decontextualized, like ripped from its context, abused, put in a different context, abandoned, and then, oh shit, you know what I mean? Like, and that's a very unacademic way of talking about it, but
Right.
10 years of distance is a balm to the is a balm to the tendency, I guess. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Hey.
I teach in a visual arts college, and one of the early stages for a young artist working in drawing requires an encounter between the belief that one already sees and the actual interruption of that in order to practice. So not what you think a chair looks like, but what that chair actually looks like. And that uncoupling of thinking I already see it and therefore confirming my idea versus going through a set of protocols, practices to actually begin to see. And for me, that's actually been the way, the word I use is encounter, to set up an encounter for myself in the plant, is to go to some of those preliminary exercises. One is called blind contour drawing. Your eyes are on the thing you're drawing, your hand is on the paper, so you're uncoupling your ability to self-confirm.
Yeah.
But the act of drawing does something to put some drag on the speed of your perception. And and in that uncoupling, for me, something like here feels like it comes in. And a chance, if there is a chance of seeing not my projection, but even seeing the physical structure of the plant well, that feels like it gives me a better chance. And the other piece from the arts context is we talk regularly about a pot communicating or a spoon communicating. So in that context, without making the pot human, the set of gestures and material moves that are embodied in that pot now generates something that's not talking, but it is, I don't know what the word is, I don't know if we have it yet, but the pot is not talking to me, but I am being shaped, configured, invited to think differently by what's embodied in that thing. I don't know if those are useful practices from also a kind of sideline academic space.
The word that comes to my mind, and that's probably just because I study literature, that's like my sort of my way of looking at it is perhaps translation. And when we talk about the vocabulary, we talk about seeing that thing through our way, is to get out of its way. Perhaps find that right word or find that right balance between trying to do that because perhaps it's not right. Because with things like these that can't speak out and I do that helps to do is that really want the right thing, you can move forward. And they can never, perhaps I'm wrong, but they can never connect this issues verbally if we say something, right? So my intimate is to enjoy English. You say something, also that's what you mean. For example, I would intervene and say, well, that's not what I mean. But if I could communicate, and the problem is that we're not good at the process of this human growth. Or you can like it growth.
Come in.
Yep.
Can you expand that a little bit more?
Thanks, Goddess. The world doesn't need more experts.
I think it's interesting how a lot of the conversation around like Western scholars rely a lot on
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Hi, Danny.
Repeat that again.
I'm the curatorial assistant at the there's actually a lot that's kind of interesting
Because race is central to that.
I think a lot of starting in my research, I focused more physical about centering around this idea. I think that's also very fun and sense. It's not just
Right.
This is the bio.
Yeah.
By doing that, by bringing in conversations around psychology that opportunities like this as well, this river of agency. That's really interesting. Now, this so idea that storytelling
But sometimes we get to what you were saying is that which humans claim the river and speak for the river becomes really important to what happens with that, with that right. That is a big question.
I'm not sure.
But I think what you were saying is, I think what a lot, I think including the sciences, people are getting back to is that old-fashioned being with so-called nature, right? So of not going with nature as something to study, something that is an object, something that needs to be experimented with, and that if you can take the time to just sit and listen, you see, hear, feel very different things, right? And so some of it is about relearning how to use all the senses to observe.
Some of that is about sitting with people who continue to maintain ongoing lineages rooted in thousands of years of listening uninterrupted, right? Which is to say that the idea of incorporating in the singular, right? Like that, you know, I don't know, listening is now the trope, but I'm not trying to like do this thing, but it does include sitting with people, right? It's not just some mystification of like, I'm communicating with the plant. Like there are real life people out there defending land, you know, protecting seeds, fighting extraction, the very same extraction that brings us into conversation with the tree of heaven. I'm not saying that you're not, you know what I'm saying, but like where I feel like I meet the resistance, and I'm so glad that there's part of me that comes back around in this moment, like through the persistence and insistence of many people that I have been or stepped into relationship with who have insisted to me that the fundamental act for me is to listen, right? And maybe that includes like across these different divides because you name it, right? Like basic, everywhere, binary, right? So there's something about that, right? Which I feel like when it comes to new trends in academia, I'm like, what's new about new materialism? And also like there's part of me, and maybe this is flipped and this is not directed so much at you, but because the word emerges and I have a reaction to it, which is like the urge to continuously name and claim and incorporate, you know, and I'm like, and where apart from practice, which is why I appreciate the way that this event configures us in relationship to each other across these, I mean, like we have to figure out how to actually sit together in these ways, right? Like beyond the sort of like, I am an X, I am a Y, like, yes, I bring the design skill, or I bring the curatorial skill, or I bring the academic training, and thanks goddess, you know, that's not all, right? Because otherwise the impulse to continuously claim and name and take, you know, like all of that, for me at least, feels like what also insists. I don't know how else to say that, you know, but do you know what I mean? What? Either you're laughing at me. I'm laughing. Yeah, there's just that sense of like, I mean, I even think about it, and I have no idea what's happening with the clock, and this is the last thing I'll say, but I even think about it in the difficulty that I had trying to do a deeper etymology of the Linnaean name of the tree of heaven, right? I mean, okay, so let's just put Linnaeus over here for a second, right? But even in the beginning, they were like, is it sumac? No, it's not sumac. Is it even the concept of species? You know, and you're a biologist, so I'm wading into territory, like respect for your
wade away. It needs to be waded into.
Like even the concept of species, even the concept of genre, you know, like if we don't get at that, right, and this persistent urge, and it's, for me, it's like, okay, there's a figure I'm in relationship with, a tree, right, but that's just like one tiny little thing, one way for like to erode, and thanks goddess it has insisted, but even the concept of species. So this is it. This is just like where I'm at with the lineage. It's like, okay, we have the common names that we refer to it as, but let's go with what Linnaeus did. I can't figure out how Linnaeus got the word ailanto, which is a Malay word. Like, how did he get that word? Who gave him that word, right? And why is it that the Malay are referring to the tree in this way that I received translated as English?
Was it named after him? Did he actually name it, or was it just used his system?
No, it wasn't. Sorry, Linnaeus, the system. Why did the person who assigned how did the person who assigned the Linnaean name get access to the Ambonese, as I've, you know, encountered, like that's the language group that it comes from in Malay. Like I didn't, and that was like yesterday, and I was like, okay, like furiously trying to find all of these things, because then Altissimo is just Italian. Like, okay, I speak that, I understand that, it's the highest. But like even like that kind of painstaking work, as you say, of actually being intimately connected to the real histories of how things come to be where they are, including us, in relationship to each other, without sending it up into a framework that can then give it back to us in the old familiar way is part of the thing, right? Like that is frustrating work. And honestly, there's some part of me that would rather not do it, but that to me is how I encounter the sense of responsibility, right? I have to know your name.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the name someone else has given you, but I have to know your name to be in relationship with you. I don't know that I even know the name of this plant.
And also that the idea of species makes all individuals interchangeable, and maybe they're not. Like naming individuals as well.
Yeah. And yeah, there's something about that sense of name which goes beyond the conventional sense of like name.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In that way. Like to sit. Then I start to trip out on language. But yeah. Anyway. Wow, okay.
I think we're pretty good on time. And yeah,
What's happening in there?
I'm
I'm sure my mom said something. Hi, Mom.
you need to get this. Oh, someone was saying that you need to give the microphone to the audience who is speaking. I'm so sorry that you
We
missed
missed
like
that.
brilliant feedback. Sorry, but you know, since we have this recording, I'll probably like transcribe into words, and like there will be other forms of
It's the beginning
of this. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here, for spending time with us.
That was
And
fun.
thank you, Che, for putting this together. It's a lot of work.
Thank you,
Oh my
Che, for
God.
the tincture and the tea
Yeah.
and the time.
So I'm gonna close this thing first, and we're having a party.
Okay, bye. Yeah.
Bye. And just like I say who's here. Oh my God. How do I close this? Yay! Oh yeah, so that's.